Guns N' Roses have been no stranger to controversy, especially during the early part of their career. But these days, Guns N' Roses are a much different band, being on time and being on their best behavior. Today, let's take a look at some of the bands who didn't like touring with Guns N' Roses. In 1988, during their Appetite for Destruction tour, Guns N' Roses would play their first Australian shows in December of that year. Opening 3 shows for the band would be local act Kings of the Sun. Prior to opening for Guns N' Roses, one of the members of the band gave an interview to a local paper, slamming GNR, with a member named Jeffrey stating, "Australia has produced some of the greatest bands in the world, and it's destroyed some of the greatest bands in the world. Rose Tattoo should have been one of the biggest." Meanwhile, member Clifford would add, "And you go over to LA and you see Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue doing the whole tattoo business, ripping them off completely." Guns N' Roses would cover the Rose Tattoo song Nice Boys for their first EP in 1986, and it was re-released as part of their 1988 EP GNR Lies. The band has always listed Rose Tattoo as an influence and even had Rose Tattoo open for them later on in their career. Frontman Axl Rose would get his hands on the interview and would have Kings of the Sun pulled off stage only 20 minutes into their set. Here's Axl addressing the crowd about removing the band.
Before we get started, we read this article backstage with this band, and it wasn't too favorable in some of their opinions, and so I'd like to publicly address that. I'd like to apologize for having a puny-ass band like Kings of the Sun open the show. Sorry we gave them an opportunity.
In the fall of 1989, Guns N' Roses would open 4 shows for the Rolling Stones in Los Angeles alongside Living Colour. It was during this time Guns N' Roses were dealing with the fallout from their hugely controversial song One in a Million, which came out the previous year on their EP GNR Lies. I've previously covered the whole controversy behind the song, the link is down below. The incendiary lyrics dealing with race and sex ignited a media firestorm around frontman Axl Rose, and ahead of the Rolling Stones gigs, Living Colour guitarist Vernon Reid would give a radio interview and spoke out on stage against Rose over his lyrics. Rose would then launch into a tirade against the band's critics that night. Back in the early 90s, Guns N' Roses were one of the biggest bands in the world thanks to the release of their epic double album Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, which came out in 1991. But one thing that's often overlooked about this period of the band was that they had some great opening acts on the Use Your Illusion tour, and some of the more notable acts include Motorhead, Blind Melon, The Smashing Pumpkins, The Cult, Nine Inch Nails, Soundgarden, and Faith No More, the last 3 of which hated touring with the band. Nine Inch Nails would open 2 shows for GNR, one at Wembley Stadium in England and the other in Germany in the summer of '91. Trent Reznor would tell Q Magazine that supporting Guns N' Roses were some of the worst shows Nine Inch Nails ever played, and Reznor would tell the publication it was only a couple of shows and they were some of the worst performances we, referring to Nine Inch Nails, had ever done in front of the most hostile, moronic audiences I've ever experienced. They were there to rock, they didn't want to see some dudes playing noisy synths, and they made that very clear to us. Our first show was in Mannheim, Germany. There were thousands of people standing there, raising their middle finger, and there were bits of sausage thrown on stage. I've tried to block it out. Nine Inch Nails producer and touring member Sean Bevan would speak to Guns N' Roses Central about the tour. Here's what he had to say.
Where he said the crowd was like not receptive at all to Nine Inch Nails on stage.
Yeah, started shades of World War II going on in the audience.
Like, weren't they throwing like sausages or something?
Throwing sausages, and they're holding their tickets up, going "Guns N' Roses, Guns N' Roses." It was pretty funny. But we were, we felt pretty confident. We thought it was crazy, but Axl really, really loved us and really wanted us to go on tour with him, and so they were being really super supportive. And then, we do our show and it's like crazy, and then it gets nutty and Skid Row goes on and the crowd goes crazy, and then it starts to get really crazy. And then we're backstage and we hear Axl's in Paris.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we snuck out as fast as we could. We got stopped by the police on the way out, and they searched our bus for Axl, like looking for Axl, and we made it out. So we got lucky. We got out before the big riot started, and it was craziness. But
in 1991 and 1992, Soundgarden would open some US and European dates for Guns N' Roses. It was in 2012 the band's frontman Chris Cornell spoke about that experience, recalling to Vulture.com, without saying anything negative about Axl, what I remember the most was that Duff and Slash and everyone else being regular, sweet, warm guys in a rock band that just wanted to play rock music. And then there was this Wizard of Oz character behind the curtain that seemed to complicate what was the most ideal situation they could have ever been in. They were the most successful and famous rock band on the planet. For some reason, there seemed to be this obstacle in just going out and participating in that. That is what I remember the most. It's sad. Slash, in his 2007 autobiography, would recall the difference between the bands, writing, "They," referring to Soundgarden, "came from a place where there was no fun to be had. It was during one of their final shows together, Slash, bassist Duff McKagan, and drummer Matt Sorum stormed on stage during Soundgarden's set while being naked and having sex dolls with them. The members of Guns N' Roses were quickly dragged off stage by their own people before they could be arrested. Guns N' Roses would end up covering the Soundgarden song Big Dumb Sex on their 1993 covers album The Spaghetti Incident, and Slash would end up having Chris Cornell guest star on his 2010 solo record on the song Promise. 2 years before Faith No More opened for Guns N' Roses, Rolling Stone would run a profile on the band in 1990. To promote the band's new album at the time, The Real Thing, Faith No More's record label had posters made up of the band that quoted the members of Guns N' Roses praising the group, but it would be something that the members of Faith No More were pretty uncomfortable with, to the point that they actually would go down and rip up their own posters. Faith No More would open shows for Guns N' Roses in Europe with Soundgarden, and also join their massive stadium tour with Metallica that same summer. Faith No More at the time was a band that wasn't shy to berate fellow musicians. In the lead up to touring with Guns, Faith No More frontman Mike Patton blasted Sinead O'Connor, Lenny Kravitz, Poison, and Aerosmith in the press. Prior to Faith No More's opening slot for Guns N' Roses in Europe, the group played the legendary London venue The Marquee. It was during that show Patton told the crowd to not even bother attending their show with Guns N' Roses, which was scheduled to take place at Wembley Stadium a month later. Once the tour kicked off, Faith No More held nothing back in the press about how they felt about opening for GNR. They poked fun at Axl going bald, him having a psychic on tour, and even brought up his girlfriend at the time, model Stephanie Seymour, who was allegedly cheating on Rose with actor Warren Beatty. They would also criticize the members of GNR for their lewd behavior with women, and were unhappy playing stadiums, claiming there was too much security, which limited their movements, as well as the audience being too far away and the sound being downright awful. Making things only worse was that Faith No More frontman Mike Patton invited the crowds to throw trash on stage, resulting in GNR's crew being forced to clean up the stage. Things would eventually make their way back to Axl and Slash, who confronted the band about their behavior, and it seemed like things would finally simmer down. GNR would tour with Metallica in 1992, and it would be one of the biggest tours of the decade. While the members of GNR were big fans of Metallica, the love didn't go both ways. Metallica frontman James Hetfield would talk to Rolling Stone a year after the tour ended, revealing, "Did I enjoy the tour? It was different. It was a good idea. We really had no idea what was going to come with it. They're a different type of band, and I use the word band loosely. It's a guy and some other guys. We were out to show people that there was something a little more progressive and hardcore than Guns N' Roses, and to go about it our way. But it was hard going on, dealing with Axl and his attitude. It's not something we want to do again." Hetfield would also goof on Axl and his tour writer in the band's documentary A Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica. He would add, telling Rolling Stone, "Yeah, Metallica humor. It didn't really matter what the hell was on it. Just the fact that Axl had his own writer was funny. It's hard to grasp. When we saw he had his own dressing room, I just didn't understand that." It was during that tour both bands played an ill-fated show in Montreal that saw Hetfield suffer serious burns in a pyrotechnics accident during Metallica's set. GNR would end up ending their set early after Rose claimed to be suffering from vocal issues, and a riot would ensue. Hetfield would tell Rolling Stone, "For some reason he didn't get enough volume, strained his voice, and it wasn't working for him. He threw a fit, and that was that. I was so disappointed in him, because he could have won so many people over by continuing the show, and he went the exact opposite way and made things 10 times worse and jeopardized people's lives. There was a lot of unnecessary violence because of his attitude." Fast forward to 2006, and during a tour stop in Cleveland at the Quicken Loans Arena, the band Eagles of Death Metal would open for GNR. It was during GNR's set that Rose referred to them as, and I quote, "the pigeons of metal," and fired them from the tour. Some claim the band had a chilly reception from the crowd, while frontman Jesse Hughes shot back, claiming that by the end of their 30-minute set they won over the fans. Hughes would speak to New Musical Express after the incident, stating, "Axl Rose is effing out of his mind. He wasn't even there when we played. He got there 30 minutes after we got done playing. He waltzed onto stage and went nuts. He had a couple of fans thrown out for pissing him off. Then he called us the pigeons of metal. Tommy Stinson, their bass player, took his bass off and goes, 'F you, that's it,' and then he threw his bass down, but then Axl picked up his bass and effing threw it back at him. It was a circus up there." Hughes would go on to say that Rose almost had a mutiny on his hands from his bandmates. He would add that the following morning he was contacted by Guns N' Roses management to see if they wanted to rejoin the tour, but they would decline the offer. Some of Rose's current and former bandmates would express their displeasure with touring with Axl in the band's early years and during the early 90s. They all leveled the same criticisms against the frontman, claiming they had no control over when he went on stage, which resulted in the band going on 2 to 3 hours after their scheduled set time, and it would lead to them losing a lot of money due to fines and having to pay union dues. In addition to that, Rose's volatile behavior resulted in not one but 2 riots, one in St. Louis and the other a year later in Montreal, and bringing the legal action the band's way. It's a far cry from the band of today, which I've seen 3 times on the Not in This Lifetime tour, which goes on time, has a little drama, and plays the same set list every night. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. We'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.